Happy August, everyone! It's the final month of the summer Kitsuo Dusk of Time and Eras of the West rotation season, which means it's time for a special Grand Prix format, as well as the hype beginning to build as Theros Age of Tracks approaches its sunset and we get ready for a new set to join the field. We've got a few card changes to go over, as well as a couple rules updates, and plenty of strategy talk to discuss, with Brawl being the variant format this month, so as always, there are links in the description below for your key resources to check out all things Revolution Custom Standard, such as the Custom Magic Discord server, where you can get updates about and play the format against others, as well as check out all of the cool cards and sets that people in the community are designing. The Revolution Compendium, where you can look through all of the cards the curators recommend for consideration in your decks, sorted by card roles. And while Manifesto, the format's dedicated Scryfall-like search engine, is currently down indefinitely, we do finally have some real replacements moving forward. First is the official LackeyBot format search for Revolution, which provides a clean analog from what we're used to with the previous search engine, but now integrated to the same website where you can check out the Grand Prix archives and the Revolution Compendium. As well as Escape from Limbo, a website using the GitHub framework set up by Canterbury Egg and showcasing the cards in the format with complete visual spoilers, a random card button, a sets catalog, and built-in deck builder. Give your thanks to both Cajun and Dr. Chipmunk respectively for these two new resources, as well as thanks to everyone else who's contributed to helping these sites get up and running, and check them out along with the other links again in the description below. Now, we have another smaller batch of card changes this month, akin to the changes we saw back at the start of July. The format's in a pretty stable place at the moment, with a few power outliers, but no single deck that's truly drawing concern or ire from the curators or community. It's a good omen as we head into the next rotation, especially with a pair of these changes being made with Brawl in mind, so stick around after these card changes are done, because there's a lot to talk about with Brawl, so the card changes are actually going to be a very small portion of this particular patch notes. Rather than a specific singular deck drawing concern from the curators, there are two cards that drew attention for very different strategies, with acknowledgement to the biggest concerns of last month. First up is Data Weaver. Its crimes against value mirrors have finally caught up to it. While the Corpse Pyre Fiend buff last month has largely been a success, introducing a new meaningful aggressive tool for aggro and mid-range creature decks to help kind of keep graveyard strategies in check, Data Weaver posed as a pretty awkward wrinkle in all of that, enabling Corpse Pyre Fiends to loop removal or value spells by integrating them from your graveyard or your opponent's to then be cast turn after turn with Data Weaver. Rather than punishing Fiend, Data Weaver is having its design seed changed to push a greater focus onto using it as an aggro and mid-range tool, amplifying your integrate effects while chipping away at the opponent's life total with a more aggressive body to back up that pressure. While it's going to demand a significant reshaping of what kinds of integrate matter shells exist moving forward, we've got explosive payoffs like Dreg Street Inquisitor that have just been waiting for better ways to integrate and amp up those integration effects. So I think Data Weaver could still see play in this new aggressive form. And the Menace is relevant for Corpse Pyre Fiend. You're still integrating the top two cards of a player's library, and you're actually hitting the top three cards of your opponent's library, or two of your own and one of theirs, depending on how you do it. And at the very least, Data Weaver is now always going to be, or almost always going to be, 1 damage on enter, so it can just push damage when cast if you need it to. On the opposite side of the value to pressure scale, we've got Penwrath Agenda receiving tweaks to two of its modes. The Trumpet Blast mode is coming down to +1/+0, but granting Trample to punch through opposing blockers more effectively, while the Bite mode is shifting to instead act like your classic expected white removal, counting up the number of creatures you control rather than their combined power to deal that much damage to an opposing creature. While the removal mode is definitely a downgrade, I think the shift to granting Trample rather than a second point of power could prove meaningful enough to keep Penwrath Agenda in the conversation for Naya tokens. With Ragtag Squad and AO keeping the number of colored permanents up, combined with the fact that the list that Cat and Tree brought last month is fairly rotation-proof heading into next month, and the chance for Penwrath Agenda to still have a place in this field is pretty high. The last change aimed at traditional standard play is Preemption Daemon, receiving a slight tweak to now have its enter trigger be optional. This opens the way for it to be used more reliably in tempo and control decks without needing a clear target on the opposing board to get rid of, or something on your own board that you want to pick up and replay. I've already felt my opinion on this card shifting, as I must admit I wasn't super optimistic about its strength when it was first pushed into the format, but as time has gone on and I've seen it get some play, it has looked really sweet. And this change can help clean up any awkward moments that it might have had previously. As far as our Brawl-related changes, let's start with now the Impenetrable, or should I say, Impenetrable Ronin. Yes, while Now was originally intended as a design seed for Brawl, early playtesting has indicated that she kind of struggles to make that role really fit for her. As a result, she's losing the unique name and legendary typing to become a more generic 2-drop creature to protect or amp up your attacking creatures. So no real tangible change in terms of gameplay besides being able to have multiple copies in play in Revolution Constructed. In place of this change, we're getting a big improvement to Kitsuo's white-black commander offerings in the form of Master of the Twin Blades becoming June Twin Blade Master. This gives players a very different kind of commander to try than we've had access to in these colors over the first couple days of Brawl playtesting. And with all of the key interactive enchantments in these colors, it's easy to see how June could make for a sweet Brawl strategy. Now, on to the big Brawl rules changes, starting with commander inclusion. Much like how Official Commander is now allowing you to play vehicles and the new spacecraft cards as of Edge of Eternities, so long as they're legendary cards with a power and toughness box, Revolution Brawl will be following suit and folding another subtype into that mix. Not only will you be able to play vehicles in the command zone, giving us 2 new options from the currently available card pool, but you'll also be able to play ruins. Uldun gives us 3 legendary ruins, from Gelthus Unspeakable Maul providing a new mono-black option, to Nerul Blade of the Ancients giving you an equipment in the command zone, to a land? Yeah, REV's going to have a land available in the command zone in Elranta Unleashed, which comes with an additional rules change appending the commander attacks to attempt to play a land from the command zone. So be careful not to get Elranta blown up unless you want to pay 2 mana to play your land drop a second time. In addition, we're getting a change to the rules on the Kunai Stone, letting it now serve as your commander and join the other clique leaders from Nylon. With all of that said, let's talk about Brawl a bit more, and what this entails for this month's Grand Prix and League play. For the uninitiated, Revolution Brawl functions a lot like official standard Brawl that you might see on Magic Arena. You choose a legendary creature, planeswalker, vehicle, or ruin. Don't worry about spacecrafts, we don't have any right now. And then build a 59-card deck around that commander, adhering to the chosen commander's color identity, with a restriction that you cannot play more than 1 copy of any given non-basic card. From there, you're able to play as much as you'd like, with both players beginning at 25 life and being able to take the first mulligan for free. Though the starting player still does not draw an extra card, as it is still a 1v1 format. You play a best-of-3 match with no sideboarding between games. Beyond that, it functions much like you'd expect any 1v1 Brawl game to function. The usual commander rules apply, such as the escalating commander tax as you recast your commander, and the commander going from zones other than the battlefield back to the command zone as either a replacement effect or state-based action. With all of that in mind, we do have a single card banned from the format currently. Faces of the Faceless runs into an awkward spot of trapping both players' commanders in the graveyard, as the ability to move them from the graveyard to the command zone is a state-based action. So no Faces of the Faceless for your deck, but you won't have to worry about the opponent having it either. Now, let's get into the details of what options are available. In total, there are 171 Brawl Commanders to choose from, though they aren't all created equally, as some don't function well within the Brawl rule set, and some absolutely thrive. We're going to be going through a lot of those 171, so buckle up, folks. Starting with Mono White, there are 13 unique options with plenty of solid viable options to choose from in specific. You could lean on cheap interactive creatures and protect them with Melon being available from the command zone on turn 1, push more aggressive with Bacillo sizing up your creatures, or go really wide with Dorisha scaling your board every turn. There's also creature strategies that can take a bit slower, such as General Diadem, being able to blank removal and eat irrelevant permanents to turn them into relevant stats on board, or Jovala to get past opposing blockers while helping you protect the few particularly solid advisors available to you. There's also Cassia to double up enter triggers on all of your permanents or make some additional tokens, or the Dutiful Wanderer to just flicker your permanents themselves while picking off opposing creatures. If you really want to go big or go home, though, you could take a risk and try and get priority inversion into play from the command zone. It'll be hard, especially as white isn't great at paying life on its own to sort of escalate that life gain trigger from the end step, but having a colossal funky alt win con in the command zone can be a statement unto itself. Blue has fewer options, but the 11 available do have a couple that are neat. There are about 5 that catch my eye. Caliphate the Mariner can very quickly rush her Blessing into play by building experience counters, which then opens the door for you to take over the game with a rapidly escalating mana advantage by casting your spells for free. While Callisto threatens to run a similar gambit on the opponent by taking card advantage through stealing cards from your opponent for each creature you have connect for damage each turn. If you want to take things a bit slower, Marelai can help you get to your more expensive spells by making treasures and digging for your key cards. Lorana can take the particularly grindy approach to assembling an overwhelming mana advantage. And Convul can drastically amplify the stats you have in play on a smaller creature, though the flash is less of a blowout when your opponent can see him coming. Black's also got kinda slim pickings, with only 5 of the 11 options again striking my interest. Some of the faster options seem pretty sweet. Krolkados, Pide's founder, can be free cast relatively quickly when you build around always having him available, while Axiomine can push a lot of damage quickly with making your non-legendary creatures your champion and then doubling their power to make them temporary. Zavok seems pretty appealing right now, even with the hit to Data Weaver's value component, because of how key life gain is looking to be against one of the big boogeymen of the new format, which we will get to shortly. While Slyhos, however you're meant to pronounce it, can push value over time as you favor your other creatures and tee them up to be turned into zombie tokens. As far as properly slow commanders go, I know some folks have their eyes on Kion or Kage, but for my money, your best bet by miles gotta be Solis. A pure resource denial strategy still works wonders because this is a 1v1 format, even when the opponent has a commander to fall back on. And the card draw and life gain Solis offers can be great for keeping the game going in your favor. Keep in mind that with her -4 taking her off the battlefield immediately if you choose to do so, she can also just be a hand attack spell to strip multiple cards from your opponent if that's all you need her for in a particular moment. Moving on to Mono Red, we hit the big source of fear for many folks right now. Euphemia of the Horse is already one of the best aggro creatures in rotation, even with her ward cost being taken away from her a few months back. And being able to guarantee you'll always have access to her is dangerously consistent. Just from early playtesting, Euphemia is proving to be a real threat, and I suspect there will be a number of people bringing her to the GP, though I wouldn't put it past some people to try and find more interesting aggro commanders to consider. Jorgen does offer an alternative to Euphemia as far as turn 1 plays go, and he tends to get better as the game drags on, but I'm not sure he can live up to the horse. If you're looking to go a bit higher on the curve, Ardor's the classic mono red bomb to jam with some success, but frankly, I think you're just better off with a Viviva this time around, as the tokens that she makes are gonna get you some card draw, and this one dodges counter spells. The Planeswalkers in red are also really solid here, with Jericho providing haste and card advantage over time, Crux for serving as repeatable removal and card filtering, and Koyos serving a role as kind of similar to Crux, but just more amped up with the potential to bomb the opponent with a bunch of copied up creatures later on. Last of our monocolors is green. We have the smallest of our single color suites here, only 9 eligible commanders, though I think 8 of them are worth at least some consideration. Everdiki is another mana engine in the command zone, and while the kindred synergies are even more sparse than with Jovala, she can still do meaningful work on her own. Menelea can also do solid work as a counters matter commander, though much like with Ardor versus Aviva, I think going up 1 mana to play Zeno might just be better due to how many good green 2-drops there are compared to 3-drops. There's also always a sound argument for Yen's Slopeskidder as a sudden and swift clock if left unchecked, if Zeno's still too low on the mana value for you. Moving to the slower end of the scale, Aurora can do some great graveyard and ramp value to tee you up for a massive lead on land count, while Rano can just gum up the board while making a Yeti every turn. Basilisk is the only planeswalker to speak of in this color, but can also help to scale your creatures or pad your life total while being free to transform to a relevant and gigantic stat line when you need to turn the corner. Lastly, Resource Inversion might be the most potent of the inversion cycle in the command zone, thanks both to green's natural strength with ramping mana into play, and because on top of the mana advantage it provides, Resource Inversion also has an infinite combo with Altar of Chrome. Granted, it's harder to find Altar in a singleton format, but then you do also just get to play reasonable cards and give them flash while getting to tap, then untap, and then tap your lands again for 3 total mana among them. Heading on over to 2-color, half of these color pairs have very good suites of options, courtesy of a lot of support coming from Kitsuo Dusk of Time, while the other half have a bit more scattershot support. Azorius is one of the former, with 8 options to pick from and a couple shared archetypes to consider. Clay's starts off this suite, looking like a mono-white aggro card, but flipping into a white-blue planeswalker if you have another planeswalker hit the board. Granted, I do actually think Clay's is going to fare better with an aggressive plan, where you get value out of his attack trigger to protect your other creatures, but the planeswalkers in these colors can be pretty potent in the right circumstances, though they're pretty low in terms of total quantity. Next, we've got a pair of token commanders, with Hyomon skewing more aggressive and looking to clone your recently made tokens, while Ukina has a slower plan and can grind out the game with her flow ability, providing additional card advantage. There's also an Enchantress angle, either by copying up your enchantments with Benthelos, or just digging deeper with Afara. Lastly, though I remain skeptical of him even 4 months into his tenure in the format, or I guess 3 months beginning the 4th, Nimue does still have some ardent supporters, and I'll admit that discounting your X-cost token-making spells for each token you have in play can be a pretty significant spike in board presence, especially when you're getting that discount from an Anthem that's sitting on the board as well. Dimir, meanwhile, only has 5 choices to consider, and while I know that some have people intrigued, I think there's an obvious winner. Covering our bases, Ys Trace Talker offers a funky sort of Voltron graveyard plan, though it doesn't seem too exciting. Thovius Adi can be some real solid value over time, and if you want to be really optimistic about how late you can make the game go, Warden of Depths could do some really impactful things in the deep turns of a game. Realistically, though, Blue-Black's mill commanders have a history of being pretty great in a Brawl environment. While Orestes can do work with helping to push your damage through while filling the opponent's graveyard, I'm pretty comfortable saying that Finax is just the best option by a mile. He's the reigning champion of the last Revolution Brawl GP, has some great flexibility between staying aggressive by leaning on the front face and shipping him to the command zone if you need pressure up when he dies, or just using him as a sizable blocker and then flipping him to his divine side after he dies, where he then amplifies your mill and removal while padding your life total. He's one of the trickiest gods to properly and fully animate, owing to, I believe, him not generating any devotion on his backside, but he's still a haymaker in the command zone, and you should definitely not be writing him off by any measure. Rakdos is another one of the deeper multicolor options. There are 8 choices here, though some of these have a higher hurdle to clear. A lot of the best options here weren't even available last Brawl GP, with Mogus being the sole returning contender with some merit behind him. That being said, I think Black-Red's better off leaning on Karaja as an aggro tool, refilling your hand once you run out of cards, since casting him from the command zone triggers his second ability. Garen can also dig through cards very quickly, though this is more card selection than card draw. But this can fill your graveyard very rapidly and tee you up for removal from Garen's -2, or value off of his -1 as sort of a funky black-red flicker deck almost. Though, if you're looking for planeswalkers for just sheer control potential, I think Gyama is just going to be where you want to be. It's a lot of really powerful potential effects for keeping your card selection high, getting to ship trinket permanents you have in play to the graveyard, or cards you don't care about from your hands to your graveyard, either to get that card draw on the +1 or to put some real pressure on your opponent's resources on that -2. Lastly, Vixtra is one of the more dangerous Voltron-style commanders here, thanks to his annoying ward cost being made easier to turn into pure hexproof, with the ample amounts of removal available in these colors to limit what your opponent actually has to sacrifice. Gruul has a lot of viable options, 10 to choose from, and I've got 9 primed to mention. So let's clear the shared archetypes before we move on to standalone synergies in my opinion of ascending order of viability. All 3 of Kitsuo's +1/+1 counter legendaries have some degree of viability, with Shiori being the best at going tall, Menreiki going wide the best, and Amagaseto being the best at grinding out the game in the long term. I think Shiori is likely to be the best for just ending the game, though I'll admit that I've actually been spending a lot of time brewing around Menreiki instead. Then with the unique strategies, I think Sharesh is likely to have the most trouble due to the harsh restriction on what you can get away with casting from your own library, though achieving Solidarity in its own right won't be as tough, and having a commander that just lets you hit Solidarity every turn from the command zone, like granting you the ability to generate that token every turn, can be great. Klothys is pretty costly, but I have to admit that her trigger working on abilities does mean a cheap enough equipped cost or activated ability can just turn your board into +2/+2 trampling hasty creatures every turn, which changes the clock very rapidly. I didn't write anything for Zaya. Interesting. I had completely skipped over scripting this one, so you all get to hear my unfiltered thoughts on Zaya. I think Zaya is interesting. I almost factored her into the +1/+1 counter suite from Kitsuo Dusk of Time because she does something very similar, generating some counters to make herself bigger. But I think the real thing to consider here is that she's just a 3/3 for 3 with Vigilance and Haste. This is going to give you a reasonable blocker that can apply some pressure, and then your more expensive spells refund you a little bit of mana for future spells, for future turns, while making your commander a more sizable threat. I don't think Zaya is going to take over a game on her own like any of the Kitsuo cards are capable of, but I do think she's a really solid stat line and worth at least trying in the command zone for sure. Now to the one I actually was going to start talking about, the Weft Heart has some sweet value to be had as well, especially with the strength of tutors in a singleton format, and particularly with that tutor being in the command zone, though the enchantment options to find start to fall off in strength rather fast in some cases. Then we land on the objectively good value ramp options. Hoenn champions just a decent stat bomb that becomes the freest chump blocker in the universe. When doing so, lets you make another pair of tokens when you recast them. But the real champion here has got to be Warden of Tremors, who snowballs so hard that it's put in real work in Constructed here and there, and seems primed for further explosiveness when you can guarantee that it'll be around to be cast every game. Selesnya is another option with only 5 choices to be had, and like Dimir, many look more sketchy than they actually look viable. Kaineos can be a decent Voltron commander, but looks a lot weaker than he used to post his nerfs. Only being able to find auras instead of enchantments is a significant knock. No enter triggers is a significant knock to his viability, and Ward is probably better than Vigilance in terms of him being a Voltron commander, but is still finicky. Beyond that, Lavis is similarly extremely dependent on her attack trigger to make her work. And while the potential to make a ton of lands is cool, the reality is that the colors she's in don't have the most astonishing suite of ways to actually spend that mana while fulfilling the condition she asks you to. Warden of Skies, meanwhile, is a huge ramp payoff and can lock the opponent's commander in the command zone, but actually casting it feels so profoundly out of reach for most times when you need to do so in some expeditious manner. Karametra can at least do some cool things with land auras, but she also just kind of runs out of steam in terms of value on offer. The only commander in this color combination I can earnestly say excites me is Lycaratos, whose front face can scale up your smaller creatures to make them meaningful threats, and on death, he performs a frequent contender for one of the best simple things a commander can do. His blessing immediately helps to pay the commander tax to recast him, meaning an on-curve like Haratos can immediately be recast every subsequent turn if your opponent keeps picking him off, as long as you've got untapped lands to play. Add on to that fact that the blessing fixes colors and gains you incidental life, and Haratos has me intrigued enough to be considering him in the 59 of at least a couple strategies. Orzhov has the most to talk about here by a mile, and you can thank both Kitsuo and Cyberos for that fact. It's got 11 available commanders, with 10 of them doing some pretty good things. We've already talked about June Twinblade Master back with the patch notes, but it's worth remembering that there are some killer enchantments in these colors, both with removal value and just card generation, irritating your opponent. Put 2 Tithe to the Machines in play and watch your opponent silently start writing curses on your bloodline. Meanwhile, K Exiled Survivor is the least flashy of our selection by a mile, but again, life gain seems more relevant with Fears of Ephemia ruling the format, and the combination of Vigilance and Conditional First Strike at least means you'll be able to swing in with K in most circumstances. I've heard mixed results about Tachibana, and obviously I'm no fan of Exalted, but I have heard of her doing some crazy things just in the testing period leading up to this month. Califax, meanwhile, is already the primary reason to want to try any Level Up Matters synergies in traditional Constructed, so having them available in the command zone seems pretty great, even if all you're doing with it is just putting a level counter on one of your creatures to give it +1/+1 permanently. There's a pair of Aristocrats commanders here too, with Pero being the more aggressive option to push damage in the air, while Athreos plays a bit slower but can get some amazing value if you're able to animate it quickly enough. And of course, you can even pose as a 3-color deck and care about colorless costs to get access to Azantium to copy up any interactive or value generating effects you may have across your artifacts. But we're not done with Orzhov yet. I said 10 cards. Eleanor can become an annoying indestructible blocker with Flash that then flips into a Haymaker removal spell and threat once transformed, especially when exiling a legendary creature seems increasingly likely to happen in a format like Brawl. While Alcadia provides repeatable treasure and 1/1 token generation, and can eventually flip into an indestructible value factory to pile on the stats on board and resource advantage you get from her triggers. Last but certainly not least, I've heard some particularly intriguing murmurs about the strength of Sanaito against Mono Red. Between her updeck killing Ephemia, her 0 letting you push more damage while gaining life, and her -3 leveraging the one-sided matchup by springing your life total back up at the cost of your opponent's. Honestly, it's hard for me to say which of the Orzhov commanders here seems best, because even the sketchier options of this lineup seem really strong. Izzet's options are really scarce by comparison. There are only 7 choices here, and 3 are pretty rough. And the 4 I'm going to show you here aren't even that much better. Olismars can rebuy your instants and sorceries as you cast them, but having to pay an extra 2 mana to replay them is kinda rough. Keranos can discount all of your non-creature spells while pinging your opponent for each one. It's probably just the best of this bunch, but I can't say it particularly inspires me to think this is going to be a stellar deck, especially when Keranos gets harder to animate if you're slinging a bunch of instants and sorceries, so you kind of need to be caring about enchantments specifically to animate Keranos, because artifacts usually aren't going to get discounted while contributing devotion. It's a really weird balancing act. Gnosa can steal opposing permanents for a couple turns, but lacks a lot of the most meaningful ways to leverage that theft by either sacrificing or flickering the things you've stolen. And in the case of flickering, I mean flickering and keeping them permanently, not flickering them and putting them back into play under its owner's control, which is what we have now. And Flage? Flage has always been the more lackluster of the 2 Theros Titans we have in the format. And even with his glow up to compensate for the nerfed ability cost, he's just not that remarkable. At least you can tuck him to the bottom with his graveyard ability and just move him to the command zone instead, because the replacement effect from graveyard to library works the same as commander to library, or battlefield to library. So no, I don't think Flash is good. Golgari, meanwhile, is the only two-color pairing that has a lot of great options without being supported by Kitsuo, and that's thanks in part to the suite of stellar value engines the colors have received over the last 2 years. Farika can be a decent grindy tool that gums up the board over time, though she may not excel in the command zone specifically. Bias is a great card advantage engine, just completely running over the opponent while pushing aggression, while Paroya ticks things harder towards sheer value, letting you copy up your interactive enchantments, artifacts, creatures as you sacrifice them. And worth remembering, sagas that don't have time loop naturally sacrifice themselves on their last chapter. Fido can be used with some solid life total pressure and counter generation to amp up its stat line, and can even just sit in your graveyard and rebuy some interactive tools to stall out the game, while Jack pushes a ton of damage while padding your life total as you just trickle cards from both players' hands, libraries, graveyards, anywhere, or battlefields, anywhere, to their graveyards. And if you want a big control planeswalker, you can just play Czar. Come up the board with zombies, mill yourself and gain some life, start edicting a couple of your opponent's bigger permanents, and build your way up to that ultimate to just completely bury the opponent. And of course, Skotha remains a stellar card, even after his nerfs, thanks to now being a hand-attacking Sun Titan. Yeah, play any of these. So many of these are really sweet. Boros has one fewer option than even Izzet, but I think 4 are once again playable out of the 5 available. Like, these are actually a lot more reasonable than Izzet has, even. Amber can become a solidly dangerous creature on her own with enough non-mana abilities to help her build those counters. Toki can leverage a wide board and convert it into a lot of damage on another keyword-dense creature depending on the circumstance. Karina can play a more controlling strategy, turning shared resources to your benefit, though those shared resources can be a bit of a liability in 1v1. And of course, Electes has a history of pushing a ton of damage suddenly and with great prejudice. Despite the thin pool of choices, I think Boros is just actually really solid with the choices it has available to it. Last for our 2-color options, Simic has 9 commanders in contention, with a pretty stark power differential in some of these cases. We'll talk about 7 right now, but we will revisit the last 2 later in this video. Aonuma might seem like the better ninjutsu commander at face value, but the low cap on what cards gain ninjutsu and the limited suite of meaningful bounce effects can make Aonuma a bit awkward to extract value from in this field. You could do some nice things like copying up Regice. Akihiko, while also facing issues for these reasons, may at least be a better option thanks to the evasive tokens and ward helping to keep him in play. I think Ruin's probably the most intriguing commander in general in these colors, as a commander that gets to use commander attacks to its advantage, but it's kind of just a stat bomb that can shed its stats to bank mana and card draw for a later turn, unless you're truly desperate and just want to start cracking those. Oh, no, you can't even crack the lay shards now. I'm glad I'm reading the card as I'm reading my script. You're just banking cards and mana for another turn. Jemmy and New, probably fair on the lower end, but piling counters on lands can do some really scary things, especially with Ruins that come with bonus keywords or meaningful attack triggers. Nocturne's also really awkward, demanding a bunch of unique counter types on your board just to get a different kind of escalating stat bomb. But while it lacks trample, unlike Ruin, it does at least keep scaling up turn by turn. Simul is our only proper and full token commander here, even with some of the other options making tokens. And with how good Simul's triggered ability is, I'm inclined to be pretty optimistic about her compared to the competition. Granted, there is also just merit to jamming Crewfix. Mana doubler in the command zone is always going to lead to some explosive turns later. We'll split the 3-color cards into shards and wedges, and for the shards, there's a lot to like, with 2 cards in each trio seeming reasonable, though there's some extra cards in Bant that I'll address when we get there, but rest assured, I'm not leaving a single 3-color card out of the shards selection here, or I'm not leaving a card out for most of the rest of the selection as we go. As mentioned, Kunai Stone has gained a commander clause, but it does have some awkward tension with wish effects not working in Brawl. That being said, it's a great card advantage engine, and in the times I've seen it played and constructed, the wish clause has not needed to come up for this card to do some real work. Though I've honestly got higher hopes for Codename Spider. It's an annoying enough body for the cost that functionally cantrips on enter and turns small repeatable surveil effects into consistent card draw. They're the only Brawl commander I've got some actual playtesting in with so far, and it's been a good enough showing that I've even begun reevaluating my thoughts on Spider as a standard playable card. Like, I think Spider is the real deal. I'm a big fan of it. For Grixis, the options are a bit more awkward. The first battalion isn't exactly a massive set of bodies, though it is nice to take Decayed off of your minion tokens. So if you're really interested in trying to push as many pledges as possible to a particular clique, first battalion's probably your best bet, and just encouraging you to just pledge Hazak as much as you can. Krint is also a bit finicky, but the value potential here is really high. It just costs a lot of life in a field where aggro is kind of ruling people's thoughts and striking a lot of fear. As for Jund, you kind of get your choice of which flavor of treasure commander you want. Sola asks you to bank them and convert them into life gain and card draw, while Dante turns that artifact mana into removal. Sola's pretty awkward here, but Dante is a super sweet mid-ranger control commander by just being repeatable removal from the command zone. For Naya, AO is pretty well regarded as one of the best parts of the Naya tokens deck in Standard. And while a lot of potential includes in that deck are easier to put in here, AO can be more awkward against things like the dreaded Ephemia players, so it's got a high ceiling, but do tread carefully and don't always expect jamming AO as early as possible to be in your best interest. Mondo, meanwhile, actively helps to push the board wider and punches for a lot of damage with a sufficiently full battlefield, but 5 mana can be a big ask for a tool like this in Brawl. At last we arrive in Bant, with 4 decent options ranging from poorly supported but still alright to actively amazing. Leo's a cool enchantment creatures matter commander, but unfortunately even with Theros still in the field, that's just too shallow of a pool to lean on. That being said, Leo counts themselves, so it's just a cantripping 2/2 with vigilance and ward that gains you 1 life, which makes it a pretty reasonable flicker target in 3 colors that are all fairly interested in replaying your creatures over and over anyhow. Carlisle, meanwhile, is a sweet counter-amplification bomb, but runs into similar problems as Mondo of costing a little too much to feel great about in the command zone, considering you have to do a little more work afterwards. I've been a pretty vocal naysayer for Ayeshi in general, but they do have a lot more going for them when you can plan to have them every game. That -X just looks worse when you're exiling a commander, because it just makes a blank Saga token. Lastly, Severin Sparkmind is a card that has impressed me more and more every time I look at him, and when you can be certain he'll show up every game, oh yeah. That is probably one of the spiciest 3-color commanders you could consider in my mind. Like, Severin takes over games if you do not deal with him swiftly. And you're gonna get him turn 3 or 4 every game. Either putting Dork in play on 2 to make sure you cast him on 3, or you just build up some things with counters in play leading up to him, and then you can untap your mana by removing those counters the turn you play him to then jam other things afterwards. My goodness, Severin is so good. As for the wedges, pickings are a lot slimmer here. Berrymasters are only Abzan commander, but does some great stuff with amplifying token creation and pushing a ton of artifacts into play. Emma's similarly the sole Jeskai option, providing some incidental value as you activate abilities and letting your legendary permanents, lands and planeswalkers included, help tap down opposing creatures when needed. Aqua Crew's our last standalone commander option here, repping Sultai with a self-mill plan, and it's a familiar one-shot removal effect, though you can flicker to reset the condition and reuse Aqua Crew's removal clause to just keep turning things into islands. Carta is one of 2 members in the Mardu slot, serving as a more aggressive candidate compared to Magma Council, who gets an easier removal ability than Aqua Crew and pushes damage to the face relatively cleanly. I think Magma Council is another real contender for a strong control grindy commander. Last color combo up in 3 colors is Temur, with Gaigeka serving as a very exciting contender for Spellslinger strategies, thanks especially to the ease in animating it permanently as well as the built-in hexproof once you do reach that point. Its companion in this slot, Stitches, however, is not so lucky. That front side is profoundly unremarkable compared to the alternatives, both in its colors and in the field in general, and the transformed side is really not that much better. So, sorry, Stitches. For the first time since original Cheeky rotated out of the field, if I'm remembering correctly, there was one then, there are also 4-color commanders to consider for Brawl, courtesy of Kitsuo, though Chikyu did sneak one in here as a bonus with the second Chikyu set. Akurio comes with everything but green and is a pretty great body with a trigger that looks a lot better when you can plan around it, packing board wipes, sacrifice outlets, and vehicles to make sure your creatures are always tapped when it comes time to die. EY and Oda is probably my favorite of this batch for their potential to push in an insane amount of damage with mass sacrifice or board wipe effects, though the lack of white does take our best board wipes in the field away from this particular strategy. Akai and Toyotomi has the opportunity to push a lot of counters on themselves or something else, but I'm not too optimistic on this one. Teshima, however, has proven to be a very spooky card once she hits play, and guaranteeing her in the command zone seems worth the trouble of the inconsistent mana base. I think she's going to fare a lot better than her alternative, Higana, who's mostly 4-color in spirit, courtesy of that activated ability, and whose text box requires a lot of work for a not particularly thrilling payoff. I've been similarly negative about the Ancient Master for these past couple of months, and the lack of red making it hard to attack with him immediately is a particular sore spot for me, but I won't deny that being able to plan around him in Brawl makes his attack trigger a lot more intriguing. We've made it to the full rainbow, folks, though none of these cards actually ask you to pay all 5 colors to cast them. Zuhan, Tenki, and Nykthos all have some specific synergy they ask you to care about in cycling, weathers, and shrines respectively, though all 3 could just merit attention without those synergies. If you just want all 5 colors in your deck, Zuhan's Flicker Claws can be nice even if you're rather low on cycling cards. And By Right could totally be a win con in the right scenarios, though that requires a lot of things to go well for you over the course of the game. Tenki's got a lot less luster here, as weathers can't sit in your sideboard, but just being a 2/2 for 2 could be enough if you want to go on a 5-color counter strategy, perhaps. I think Nykthos has the strongest base synergy, with plenty of perfectly viable shrines available for him to become indestructible and for him to tutor up with his attack clause. There's also 3 legendary lands if you decide you care about any of those. I think Zuhan has the most going for him if you opt for a synergy light plan, but if you do want to care about their synergies, Nykthos and Tenki do have some things to contribute to the conversation. I just think they really want to lean on those synergies to justify being in the command zone in place of Zuhan. And of course, with none of these requiring more than 2 colors in the case of Nykthos to cast, you can also just make these 4-color, 3-color, or even 2-color commanders where you play the colors that you most care about to make synergies come together. We've arrived at last to colorless cards, the end of the line for our differing commander options. 6 cards to choose from here, and though I think 5 are all right, there's another clear contender for best candidate. Obviously, there's value to having Alranta in the command zone as an extra land if you need it, though all of these commanders have a big challenge ahead of them because Colorless has a slim card pool. There's enough to build a deck, but it's kind of hard to make that deck hum unless the commander is particularly remarkable, and Alranta just isn't quite on its own. Similarly, Kimis has some sweet text, but it's a tad slow in most cases. There are a few odd creatures that are great to copy up even in colorless, but so maybe you try it. Nerul I want to be excited for, but it just seems too clunky, and you're either paying paying 4 mana to equip this, or paying 8 mana to just animate this on its own. 2 mana is at least a really nice cheap casting cost. It feels really sluggish. Similarly, Takashi is a super sweet card. Just doesn't feel as sweet when it's in the command zone and you have access to 0 colors. Nah, if you're really looking to play colorless, there's one commander that properly makes up for the shortcomings of this slimmer card pool, and it's Ziv, who can leverage integrate effects well, eat away at the opponent's hand, apply a reasonable amount of pressure, and pick off anything you could care to remove from the board. Ziv, if my memory serves, got second place in the last Brawl GP, and while some of the cards have rotated and some of the cards got nerfed, Ziv is still undeniably a haymaker of a Planeswalker. Now, I excluded more than a few commander options here because they're ones I don't have particularly high hopes for, but that's not to say they aren't viable. In fact, I think even the less remarkable commanders can do some good work with the right color combination, with the right cards included in the 59, thanks to just how good the card pool is right now. I do have a couple important warnings to issue, though, before you go looking for something outside of what I've mentioned here. First off, be wary of commanders whose core mechanics conflict with the commander rules. Tsubasa wants to be put into play for his ninjutsu cost to truly thrive, but he has to be in your hand to do so. This isn't commander ninjutsu. Tomer, meanwhile, asks you to spend 3 different colors of mana to cast him, but he's a colorless commander, so you have to run generic mana-fixing rocks for a commander whose full ability requires you to play multicolored spells in a colorless deck. It's just a bad fit. There's also Kindred Matters cards that are just a bit too narrow for the current pool. Lost Caller of the Sea really demands you have a high count of sea monsters that just isn't feasible right now, especially in mono blue. And while Zale opens the door to a couple more cards in green, it's still a really tiny card pool, though he at least has relevant mana ramps in his text box. I know I mentioned Jovala and Every DQ despite those both having similarly small Kindred themes, but they at least have meaningful enough text boxes and stat lines to merit some consideration. Lastly, remember that wish effects don't function in Brawl, as I mentioned with Kanai Stone. Iviana's -2 here only makes treasures, it doesn't find a dragon from outside the game. And Warden of Wishes lets you remove a wish counter, but doing so doesn't actually do anything. Now, that's not to say that all of these cards are completely useless. Tsubasa and Tomer can both do good work in the 59 of your deck. Zale's a reasonable mana dork, and both Iviana and Warden of Wishes have relevant text beyond their wish effects. Just be conscientious of the tension available in cards like these, should you choose to build around or play with any of them. And that, at last, wraps up our patch review for August 2025. As we gear up for the Brawl GP this month and the next set announcement in the coming weeks, I'd love to know what commanders you're excited to play with this month, as well as what you're going to miss most when rotation comes next month and we say goodbye to Theros Age of Trax. Sound off in the comments if you'd like, and otherwise be sure to check out the links in the description below for all your resources to keep up with the format and give this channel a subscribe if you want to be notified of future uploads as we get the GP kicked off and the next set review quickly approaches. Until then, take care everyone, and I'll see you in the Revolution chat. Bye-bye.